Okay. Good evening. Tonight's meeting is being live streamed. A link and a login information is available on the district website. The meeting is also being recorded and will be made available on the district website as soon as possible. Community input is encouraged and welcome. Input must be informational in nature and address the entire board rather than one particular member. The Board of Education cannot engage in a discussion or debate in response, but we will take the information for review and direct to the appropriate district employee to respond. Community input opportunities are available on the district website or limited spaces available in person at the district office. We are using screening and social distancing. Tonight, we received one online community input. It has been sent out to all the board members. It was in reference to social studies standards. This meeting is now called to order. It is March 10th, 2021, and the time is 6:32. Our mission is to provide a safe and caring climate and culture in which we engage, inspire, educate, prepare, and empower all learners in partnership with their surrounding community to be successful in today and tomorrow's society. Les, will you please lead us in the Pledge of Allegiance?
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you, Les. Now will you please call roll?
Scott Andreessen. Scott Andreessen. Al Dahlgren.
Here.
Zach Dorhold. Here. Les Green is present. Shannon Hawes.
Here.
Natalie Ringsmuth.
Here.
Monica Segura Schwartz.
Here.
Also in attendance, Assistant Superintendent of Elementary Education, Dr. Marcia Beisch, Assistant Superintendent of Secondary Education, Dr. Lori Putnam, Executive Director of Learning and Teaching, Lori Posch, Executive Director of Student Services and Special Education, Carol Potter, Executive Director of Research, Assessment, and Enrollment, Dr. Sylvia Huff, Executive Director of Community Education, Adam Holm, Executive Director of Finance and Business Services, Amy Scalarud, Executive Director of Operations, Gary Ganji, Executive Director of Human Resources, Tracy Flynn Bowe, Director of Community Engagement and Communications, Tammy DeLand, Director of Equity Services, Ellen Stewart, Director of Technology, Ryan Cox, and Executive Assistant, Jan McGuire.
Thank you, Les. Now I'm looking for approval of tonight's board meeting agenda and the work session agenda.
Second.
I have a motion by Scott and a second by Monica. Les, can you please call roll?
Al Dahlgren.
Yes.
Zach Dorhold. Yes. Les Green is yes. Shannon Hawes.
Yes.
Natalie Ringsmuth.
Yes.
Monica Segura Schwartz.
Yes.
Scott Andreessen.
Thank you, Les. Next up, the consent agenda. The consent agenda consists of non-controversial items that the board adopts routinely without debate. Any single member may remove an item from the consent agenda by requesting removal at the time the consent agenda is moved for adoption. On tonight's consent agenda, item A, approval of personnel staff changes. Item B, approval of monthly treasurer's report. C, approval of monthly financial report. D, approval of board policy 421, gifts to district personnel as revised, third reading. Item E, approval of board policy 534, unpaid bill charge as revised, third reading. Item F, bid award, Lincoln Roofing Project. Item G, call for bids, McKinley Elevator. And item H, call for bids, Controlled Entrance Project. Looking for a motion to approve tonight's consent agenda.
So moved.
Okay, motion by Natalie, second by Zach. Les, can you please call roll?
Zach Dorholt? Yes. Les Green is yes. Shannon Hawes?
Yes.
Natalie Ringsmove?
Yes.
Monica Segura Schwartz?
Yes.
Scott Andresen? Yes. Al Dahlgren?
Yes.
Thank you, Les. Next on our agenda is Board of Education Standing Committee reports. Checking with board members here, Natalie, Achievement Integration Equity Committee, Natalie Ringsmith, Chair, do you have a report?
Yes, I do. Thank you for calling on me first. Let me just pull this up here. Okay.
While Natalie is pulling that up, I'll let you know there is none for Finance Committee.
Okay. Zach, are you done? Brief, okay. We like brief.
Can you go, Zach, so I can find my notes? Thank you. Is that okay, Madam Chair?
Oh, yes, go ahead.
Part of the MSD meeting. Yeah, so successful in amending that to change it to develop and implement a plan to close the special education gap in 5 years. So that will be the formal AMSD platform for this year. So thanks to the hard work of this district and board members throughout the years, they carried plenty of weight. And why didn't we think of that? So it's kind of a win for us, I think, to get that more firmly recognized.
Thank you. Les, does Personnel and Negotiations Committee have a report?
No report.
Okay.
Haven't met.
And Monica, you're going to have one, correct? I think that's what I thought. Are you ready?
I'm ready. Thank
Okay.
you, Madam Chair. We actually met this is back in February on the 16th, and we heard from Lacey Locken, the American Indian Education Coordinator, about the update that then she presented at that next board meeting. So we've already seen that. And then we also had Ellen Stewart talk to us about the Achievement and Integration Plan update, which we'll see tonight. And our next meeting will be on March 16th at 8 a.m.
Thank you, Natalie. And then Board Development Policy and Governance Committee, Monica Segura Schwartz.
So I have a brief report too. We review the policies that we're going to talk about today for first reading. I do have a question for everybody. So I thought last year when Shannon was the chair for this committee, did you say that we wanted to have a retreat in the beginning of this year? Just wanted to check if we need to be doing something about retreat in governance at this point.
Well, I don't remember that. Was that before COVID?
No, that was when we decided not to have a retreat because of COVID. So my question to the board is, do you want the governance committee to be planning a retreat soon?
I wouldn't just plan a retreat for the sake of planning a retreat. I would plan a retreat if there is a topic that needs deep discussion and needs more time than we can provide it at a board meeting, but I'd kind of let the topics drive the meeting, not the meeting drive the topics.
I would agree with that. Was there something that you guys had thought of?
No, I'm just thinking about timing and about how that will work. In my opinion, the retreat has two purposes: for us to regroup and also to look at strategic planning, and also to onboard new members that has some of the goals in the past. if I would be looking for those topics if you wouldn't, if you wanted to have that, but if you don't think that that's an appropriate timing, I just was checking.
Okay, Les, do you have a comment? on
Well,
that?
what I'd like to do is have some conversation with Natalie about a topic or topics before, because I haven't talked to her about it yet, and I just want to have a conversation with her about whether or not that would be a useful topic, and then we can get back to you on that, if it makes sense.
So can we, no rush, and then that'll start some conversations? Okay.
That concludes my report.
Okay. Okay, thank you. That was everybody. That adjourns tonight's board meeting. It is 6:42 and opens up tonight's Board of Education work session. First up on the work session is Mdhr report and update presented tonight by Dr. Marcia Beisch, Assistant Superintendent for Elementary Education.
Good evening, Chair Haas, and board members, as well as community members joining us this evening via live streaming. We have a great team of district-level staff from learning and teaching, student support services, equity, and research evaluation and assessment who are involved in these biannual reports to Mdhr and the board. In the agreement with the Minnesota Department of Human Rights, District 742 agreed to provide updates twice a year in the months of September and February. You should have received the full report and a written summary highlighting the work since the last report in September. This presentation will highlight some of the items in the written summary that you received. I'd like to remind the board of the ongoing work that was agreed upon at the onset of this agreement between the Minnesota Department of Human Rights and District 742. And that ongoing work was to work on the elimination of zero tolerance policies, except where required by law, that in-school suspension practices would be designed to hold students accountable while keeping them in school whenever possible, that we would have a robust and fully implemented positive behavioral intervention and support program, that we would utilize restorative practices as well as culturally responsive, utilize culturally responsive instructional practices, that we would have social emotional learning provided to our students in instruction as well as support, and that we would provide additional staff training in classroom management, conflict resolution, and ways to de-escalate classroom disruption and misconduct, as well as design programs to engage families. In addition, we would educate students on conflict resolution skills, and that there would be a significant expenditure of district resources to provide in-school alternatives to suspension. And I might add here that we utilize behavior resource or student support rooms on that expenditure. Our evaluation framework includes activities, outputs, outcomes, and impact. During this last reporting period, the two outputs we focused on included student support and family support. The first area I'll cover is student support. One of the student supports included check-in and check-out, which is a targeted intervention that can be used to decrease chronic low-level behaviors. Currently, all behavior resource specialists, deans, counselors, and educational equity outreach coordinators have been trained in check-in and check-out. During distance learning, check-in and check-out was used to monitor and support student engagement. It provides daily personal contact for students from a trusted school staff member. It is a structured process with frequent feedback and recognition. The program encourages school-to-home communication. As of February 25th, 102 742 students were receiving the check-in, check-out intervention. 68% of those were students of color, and 7% of those were special education students. All District 742 schools have a student support room that is staffed by at least one behavior resource specialist and/or a behavior support specialist. Schools have designed the room as a calming space to be available throughout the day for proactive and reactive breaks as needed. Students access these rooms through identification via the multi-tiered systems of support. Staff work with students proactively to create behavior plans for students who are struggling to follow school-wide expectations with the goal of reducing loss of instructional time and special education referrals. During distance learning, support room staff worked with students on engagement, work completion, and providing virtual breaks. Support staff have also been an integral part in transitioning students back to in-person learning. As of February 25th, 105 742 students accessed student support rooms. 72% of those were students of color, and 17% of those were special education students. Greater Minnesota partners with our school district to provide co-located mental health services for students in grades K through 12. Greater Minnesota has 13.6 staff in 13 of our general education buildings. These mental health practitioners provide individual, group counseling, and skill building with a focus on family partnerships. The greatest benefit is that students can receive these critical services during their school day. Data from June 1st through December 31st of 2020, Greater Minnesota worked with 325 of our students. 149 were in elementary, 90 in the junior highs, and 86 in our high schools. Our district was able to offer academic homework support to our students through a variety of partnerships with local agencies. We also set up virtual afternoon, evening support for students, which were led by our very own licensed teachers. The elementary sessions were held on Monday through Thursday during the months of December and January. We had students log in for support each night, with several nights totals being around 40 students throughout the course of the support time. The secondary sessions began in December and are planned to continue throughout this school year to ensure that our secondary students have support for passing their credit-bearing courses. Secondary support is offered in language arts, math, science, and social studies. The teachers' attendance logs report that from December through February 23rd, our middle schools averaged 14 participants per day, and our high school 12 participants, with several days having more than 20 students in attendance. Math and social studies had the highest reported participation at the middle level, while the math and language arts sessions reported the greatest participation at the high school level. During fall of 2020, our district transitioned to a new data warehouse system called EduClimber. A team of district stakeholders consisting of MTSS team members, academic coaches, principals, and district leaders ultimately decided on this system because of its ability to quickly combine assessment, behavior, and attendance data into a profile view of a child. The system then takes this information a step further by allowing us to quickly visualize the data through the use of students' photos while disaggregating the information by a number of categories. Provided on the slide is a screenshot displaying the students in our district disaggregated by primary disability type. Our students are protected in reports, and as I mentioned earlier, students' yearbook photos can typically be displayed in this data. Finally, thresholds are another feature that our district is currently implementing. Through the creation of custom thresholds and warnings, the appropriate staff are alerted whenever a child meets a certain threshold. For example, members of a school's MTSS team can be alerted when a student receives 2 discipline referrals or has a certain number of tardies. This then allows school staff to appropriately intervene. HIDIC TV is a media platform presented in the Somali language. It is utilized to provide monthly messaging on district information and family student support systems. Sessions are pre-recorded by district personnel and cover a range of topics. Previously aired and upcoming programming views and topics included the following. In August, there were 2 sessions, one on the 5th, which had about 5,600 views, and one on the 9th, which had about 8,400 views. And topics during August included general back-to-school information and COVID updates. In January, 1 session was held with close to 11,000 views. Topics included welcome back and learning model reminders, upcoming assessments in terms of what, why, and how, kindergarten enrollment, homework and social emotional learning supports, high school registration, device insurances. In February, 1 session was held with about 4,400 views, and topics included a student interview with Superintendent Jett, enrollment, the logistics of it, how and when, and so on, and mental health supports. Upcoming topics will include chemical health, graduation, device collection, and grading and reporting. Another top area of family support included technology support. A key factor in sustained student success is both access to technology and the ability to navigate through the various district learning platforms. Further, providing support to families empowers them to assist and monitor their students' progress. The bicultural student support and educational equity outreach coordinator staff received technology training in the fall on a variety of platforms, including Schoology, Seesaw, and Skyward. This has enabled district staff to provide additional support in our community. Translated tutorials for navigating these platforms are available on our website in the major languages represented in our district. The Islamic Center is staffed by BCSSs and EEOCs 3 days a week for 2 hours. This support is available free of charge. Each member of the equity staff also has a Google Voice number assigned to them so that families are able to have direct communication with staff. I'd also like to point out that typically we share with you the suspension data. However, we were unable to disaggregate this time by gender, ethnicity, and disability due to there being fewer than 10 suspensions in this last reporting period. In summary, the pandemic presented us with the unique opportunity to continue to enhance and expand programs and practices to support our students and their families, particularly through the various learning models that we found ourselves in. While we recognize that the pandemic has resulted in a decrease in the number of students who were suspended from school during this period, the need for ensuring that we are providing social emotional learning support to all our students, particularly our students of color, became more evident. This summary report highlighted what some of those supports were. We continue to work diligently to improve the culture and climates of our schools and provide the social emotional support our students need to be successful in school. I open it up for questions. Yes. Oh, sorry.
Thank you, Marcia. Les?
It's sort of, I heard that number before, less than 10 in the suspensions. The question I have has to do with drastic change in behavior on the part of students and staff, or just the change in the way we do things that intervened in a different way?
I'll start, and I'll offer Dr. Putman to have a chance to talk about what she's observed in secondary. What I've heard from elementary principals and from teachers at the elementary level is for what we believe has contributed to the lower numbers of suspensions. Our K through 2 students We had 50% of students at capacity in our classrooms, so there were smaller numbers of students. Students were distant. Our 3rd through 5th graders came every other day, and so there were fewer students in the classroom. Also, our students were podded. They ate lunch in the classroom. There were fewer transitions throughout the day, so students weren't leaving the classroom to go to music or to go to art. The art and music teachers were coming to the classroom. As well as recess was podded and led by teachers. And so those are some of the reasons why we think that there were fewer discipline referrals. Also, I think just the attention to ensuring that our students were connected and the multiple times that we connected with families and the social emotional learning supports that were provided to students to ensure that they were being successful through the various learning platforms. Those are some of the reasons why we think that the numbers were lower.
And that would have some, the smaller classroom concept, that's part of that concept. There's fewer people.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, good, thank you.
You're welcome. Dr. Putnam, did you want to add anything? Okay.
Okay, Monica?
So following up on that part, so what are we taking forward? You're describing some experiences that are due to the situation that we are right now in COVID. So what are we taking forward?
I was just meeting with a principal today, and that was just part of the conversation that we were having. What do we take forward from this? And I think that we've learned many things. And particularly, I bring back the social, emotional, and learning support that's been provided. Not that we weren't doing it before, but I think there was a greater intentionality because we were in various learning platforms and students weren't physically always in our buildings. We wanted to ensure that we were connecting with them and ensuring that their needs, both social and emotional as well as physical needs, were being met. And so, they did many more home visits, or they called them porch visits. And those are some of the things that principals have identified not wanting to lose, that really intense connection that has happened with families and students. That's one example. Do you want to add something?
The other thing I'd like to add to that is, because we've been talking about that exact question as well, and I don't want to give the indication that we have not had high standards in the past, but we are going to carry high standards for our students because we know that they can rise to meet our expectations. We saw them do it. And so that's one thing that we want to continue. I also think we gave them a lot of support to meet those very high expectations. There were lots of visual reminders. There were lots of cues, either spoken or nonverbal. And I think and we were very clear about teaching our expectations. So I think wrapping all of that together is something that we will continue, particularly at the secondary, to be bringing forward as well.
Go ahead, Monica.
So I'm really happy to hear that you are being intentional about teaching expectations, because I do think that one of the biggest issues that I have experienced in my life before with children not meeting those expectations is because many times they're not clear. And there is a lot of assumptions about what you want to expect from each other. So I'm glad to hear that. I have another question that is maybe for Carol. One of the things that I have seen in the past, and I was curious when I was looking at your data, is IEPs, how IEPs are given, how IEPs, in many cases, how do they work? I have, in the past, worked with families that the only way that they could get personalized help for the child in reading, for example, because a child wasn't meeting reading expectations, was through an IEP and having that done. But an IEP is given because there is issues within the child. So so I myself had ethical considerations about that. So, so, so then, so I wanted to ask about how IEPs are giving, what is the relationship between these data that we're looking about suspension rates and also in the rooms that you're showing us what was happening there and that and IEPs.
Okay, Laura, you froze there just for a second, and so we weren't able to catch the rest of the question, but I think what Monica was asking was about students on IEPs and how do they receive services for behavior? Was that the question?
No, not exactly that. Should I talk about that?
So if it's okay with everybody, I'll just run down real quick and I can answer the question.
All right.
We would love that. So then she's going to come down here. Is that right? Okay.
If I could just add to what, Lori was alluding to in terms of teaching expectations, the PBIS program system, which is both at the elementary and the secondary, does just that in our buildings. And this year in both elementary and secondary buildings, those were adapted or adjusted in order to teach expectations around social distancing and mask wearing and so on, in addition to the other expectations that are usually taught and modeled.
Thank you, Carol. So I don't think that you heard my question. So I was looking at the data about what happens in the rooms or people that get referred to those, I forgot the name of those rooms.
Student support rooms.
The student support rooms. And this is all in the context of suspension rates. But one of the things that I wanted to compare and I wanted to get more information is in my experience in the past, I have worked with the students that the only way that they could get support for reading, for example, or something was through an IP and a personalized support or something that will help them more in that way. And here I see a lot of kids using other type of support, but it's in relationship with a suspension or not, well, kind of. So I'm just wondering how those two things work together or not, and what is how are we moving forward to just providing different types of support to students in relationship with an IP or not?
Oh, good question. And so a couple of things, team. First of all, good evening, everyone. And students on IEPs receive both behavioral support and academic support, you're right, through a plan that is created for them. So in conjunction, in regard to the student support room, students aren't necessarily making use of that student support room if they have a plan already on an IEP. And so the student support rooms are mainly used by our general ed students for the behavioral purposes and the social emotional learning pieces. Now, the other question regarding academic support for our general ed students, and that would come in the form of interventions. And so we have what's called a MTSS, or multi-tiered system of support team, that there's members throughout the entire school. So administrators are on the team, social workers, guidance counselors, teachers will bring student names forward of students that may be struggling. And so then that team designs interventions, and typically in about a 6-week trial period, they'll propose an intervention that the students will and the teachers will be utilizing in the classroom. And so that's something aside from an IEP. And so we do that to prevent students to have to be assessed for an IEP and categorized as in need of special education services. And so we have a varying wide range of supports that we provide in the academic arena, as well as the behavioral arena for students, general ed students as well. You're welcome. Does that answer it, Monica? Okay.
Monica, do you have any other questions? Scott?
I have some questions. The report is very comprehensive, and it seems to be about the district overall. And I was just kind of wondering how much of it actually applies to minorities. And this is a report to the Department of Human Services. I liked the check-in, check-out part. How much of that is used by whites and how much of it is used by minorities? I like the support rooms, but it sort of looked like it was almost a minority-only offering. Are whites even allowed in there? The Greater Minnesota Mental Health, that seems to be something that you haven't indicated how much minorities are using it, or is it a white only? I know that they live off from getting people's insurance. A lot of minorities don't have insurance. Supposedly they have a grant program, but it's only very, very small insurance money that they live off. You were talking about homework support. Is this mostly a minorities program, or is it are white kids into it too? What's the breakdown on it? EduClimber, again, there was no real breakdown as to what are minorities and what are white students. The PBSI, is there a differentiation on that between minorities and white students? Now, they were talking about IEPs. IEPs can be very hard to get. I know we had to go hire an outside psychologist to get an IEP for my daughter. It's something that we could afford to do, but a lot of minorities cannot. This report is supposed to go to the Human Services Department. It's great for the district as a whole, describing all we have for offerings, but it doesn't really break out offerings for minorities. Can you fill me in on some of that?
I will do my best. So if you recall, the check-in, check-out data and the student support room data did indicate the percentage of students of color and special education students that were utilizing or accessing that support. And we were identified by the Minnesota Department of Human Rights as one of 42 districts in the state with having disparate data between our students of color and our special education students and their peers. And so we did just, show you what those percentages were for check-in, check-out, and the support rooms. And they're not just intended for students of color. Those supports are available for all students, but because this agreement with Mdhr asks us to identify how those supports are being provided to our students of color and special education students, we did share that data with you and with them. We did not break out the data, the homework data or the Greater Minnesota data, as you indicated, and we certainly could do that. Typically what we're asked to do is to provide the suspension data and to ensure that we're breaking that out, right? And our numbers were so few, and we wanted to be able to share with you what we're doing to provide support in terms of social emotional learning and support to our families, and that's what this report was about tonight. EduClimber is a data warehouse system, and it can pull out data in lots of different ways, and we're able to pull out data that very clearly allows us, as I indicated, be able to alert us when we're reaching a certain threshold that we've identified in our buildings regarding students of color and the number of referrals that they're having and so on. So it's a system that allows us to really track that and then be able to respond in better ways and ensure that we're meeting the needs of our students, particularly our students of color and special education students. So I'm not sure if I answered all of your questions, Scott, but that's what I was trying to write down as you were going along.
Thank you, Marcia. It's really a well-done report. You must have spent hours and hours on it.
Credit all by myself. As I shared, there was a whole team of people that were involved, and it's a team effort. Thank you.
Yeah, I do have a couple of questions. Something I was talking about today with some folks in the community actually is one thing on this report, and it is restorative practices and conscious discipline. I see, of course, because of COVID, that we had to do some workarounds with the conscious discipline training to make it in June. I think I've asked this question before about restorative practices, but especially I think with COVID-19, I'm wondering how, what types of restorative practices have you guys seen at both levels that have been utilized so far this year?
Honestly, we've had so few unexpected behaviors or problematic behaviors that might warrant that kind of response that we have not had to utilize circles. Certainly, if somebody has caused some kind of harm by maybe popping into a Google Meet and offending somebody, or then we could bring the teacher and the student together, or a student and a student together, as an example. But we have not had a lot of having to repair harm, because there's been very few incidents of behaviors.
I like that.
It's been
That's a good
wonderful.
report.
It's been wonderful. I think our kids are just so happy and grateful to be together when they get to be. So.
Well, I don't know, not at my house this morning, but they came home happy, so.
Right, morning is a different story, absolutely.
Yeah, exactly. Okay.
I would agree with that. There hasn't really been a need. And I would just add that, that is restorative training and restorative practices is something that we work on expanding every summer because we see that, as well as conflict mediation and so on, that it's an important skill that we provide our staff training in, as well as our students in, so that they can learn those skills and utilize them throughout their entire lives.
Okay, thank you.
Just that one question? Well.
You're not used to that from me, are you? Great report, is what I'd like to say.
Zach, do you have any questions or comments? Al?
As has been said, the report itself is detailed. It's a lot of work to put together. And it's been 3 years now that we've been doing this, 3 out of a 4-year requirement, or was it 5?
It was actually a 3-year commitment.
3, so okay.
So there's, what I know is that one report remains due, and that is in September.
Okay.
What I'm not sure of, and I've been attending their meetings, is they have not indicated what's going to happen after September moving forward.
So can I ask, so Minnesota Department of Human Rights then has been collecting this data or these reports from 42 districts for 3 years now, and are they issuing, they're doing something with this information that they're getting. Are they issuing any kind of guidance back to us, or are they putting together some kind of comprehensive report on what they are learning and what their recommendations are?
So when we've submitted our reports, we will get confirmation that they've received it. And then what we have occasionally received back from them as well are comments, questions. And this last time, we were even offered a chance to meet with someone to engage in dialogue regarding our report. And that was really helpful. And we utilized some of that feedback in the development of this report. In terms of what are they communicating out to other districts and what are we learning, when we meet, we have the opportunity to engage in dialogue in terms of what other school districts are doing, what we're learning from one another, and each school district has a very different way in which they're presenting their reports because there was no identified format in which to do so. We have been looking at different formats, and one thing that I wonder may happen if we continue, if we're asked to continue, is if we have a specific format in which we will be asked to submit those reports. But I would say that it's other districts are, it's been a learning experience, first and foremost for all of us, and something that we all take very seriously. I hope that answered your question, Al.
Yeah, I guess my hope is that we aren't just providing data and then they take it and walk away, that somebody down at Mdhr is putting together data and best practices from all of the reports that they're receiving in all of the school districts, and actually not just giving it back to the 42 school districts, but giving a report back to all 2,000 school districts or whatever it is in the state. It's a big number. I don't know what it is, but so that everyone can benefit from it, because it's a lot of work. I mean, to go through this, it's one thing to do the work. It's another thing to document the work and put it in a format that can be understood by people who weren't there. And that's what they're asking of us. I hope that we get something substantial and positive back from it. That's my comment. Thank you.
Monica?
I want to add, I am quite happy with the documenting of the work that has happened as a result of it. It is a lot of work, but I do really appreciate it.
All right, thank you. Next up, we have the Equity Update, Achievement and Integration Plan, presented tonight by Ellen Stewart, Director of Equity Services.
Okay, great, thank you. Okay, good evening. This presentation of the Achievement and Integration Plan, or ANI, invites you to learn about A, goals set forth by the Minnesota Legislature, B, our district status report, and C, the milestones reached this year. There we go. St. Cloud Area Schools is required to be a part of the ANI program because we are identified as racially isolated. Racially isolated, or RI, is defined as enrollment of protected class students district-wide is more than 20% compared to the number of protected class students in one of their adjoining districts. When determining which districts are eligible for this program, protected class students means students who self-report as being in one of the race and ethnicity categories used by school districts and MDE to track student enrollment. These categories are African, Black Americans, Asian Pacific Americans, Chicano, Latino Americans, American Indian, Alaskan Native, and multiracial. For District 742, we are at 59.5% protected class students. One of our neighboring districts, Sartell, is at 12.2% protected class students. This is a difference of 47.3%, which is more than the 20% required. Racially identified schools, or RIS, enrollment of protected class students at a school is more than 20% compared to the number of protected class students within the district for the same grade levels served. Discovery is the school that we were using. K-5 is at 82.6%. K-5 grade levels district-wide is 60.9%. That's a difference of 21.7%. Discovery and Talahi were previously identified as racially identifiable schools. Last month, Lincoln was identified as an RIS. However, in anticipation of Lincoln being identified, goals and strategies were implemented at Lincoln, even though they were not written into the ANI plan. We are currently finalizing the goals and strategies for Lincoln to be added to our ANI goals. The ANI plan is a multi-year plan that covers 3 academic school years. The plan was developed with the guiding question: what do we need to do to support the academic success of our protected students? The purpose of the Achievement and Integration, ANI, for Minnesota program is to pursue racial and economic integration, increase student achievement, create equitable educational opportunities, and reduce academic disparities based on students' diverse racial, ethnic, and economic backgrounds in Minnesota public schools. It is important to note that the current ANI plan for 2020-2023 was developed pre-COVID. Needless to say, the pandemic has had a direct impact on how strategies are implemented. The successes and milestones are grounded in the realities of the current day. Excuse me. The ANI plan submitted to MDE must contain 3 types of goals. MDE state goal number 1, reduce achievement disparities. Our goal, 4-year graduation rate increase. The combined 4-year graduation rate for Black, Hispanic, American Indian, and students of 2 or more races will increase from 63% to 85% by May 2023. The goal is to increase Black, Hispanic, and American Indian graduation rates to 85%. However, our continued efforts are to reach 100% graduation rate for all students. Milestones. For the student implementation of strengths-based learning models and direct student support. Some examples of learning models are AVID, BAR, which is Building Assets, Reducing Risks, Get Ready, Gear Up, curriculum with coordinators at Apollo and Tech, online credit recovery programs, weekly social emotional learning, SEL teams, connections with every family, and daily SEL lessons sent home to families via Seesaw for collaboration and reinforcement. For the staff, empowering educators, instructional staff trainings. Some of our milestones are 50% of district staff is AVID trained, books utilized for race and racism conversations, professional development, and coaching for equity. For the families, connection between school and families. Some of our successes, goal-setting conferences and student-led virtual family conferences, distance learning night, welcome calls to all new families, home visits throughout the year, family connections through the EEOC and BCSS, and again, that's Educational Equity Opportunity Coordinators, EEOC, and BCSS is Bilingual Communication Support Specialist staff. MDA state goal number 2, increase racial and economic integration. Our goal, American Indian student attendance. The consistent attendance of American Indian students will increase from 38.18% to 90% by 2023. Milestones. Indian Education and Equity Program Coordinator Lacey Locken. Achievement and Integration Individual Learning Plan for all American Indian students, current and incoming, and recruitment of American Indian students to our Young Scholars Program. MDE State Goal number 3, increase access to effective and diverse teachers or teacher equity. Our goal, access to qualified diverse teachers, to create and retain a racially diverse teacher workforce so that students and their communities are reflected in the classroom. We will increase from 6.3% or 59 teachers of color to 8% or 75 teachers of color by 2023. Some of the successes and milestones: we currently have affinity groups for staff of color with a speaker series open to all district staff. We are currently at 62 teachers, which is 6.7%, conducting career fairs and recruitment campaigns targeting teachers of color for teacher positions and pathways, non-licensed employee to teacher program targeting staff of color but open to all district staff, and 12.5 of new teachers hired for the 2020-2021 identified as teachers of color. This is where I'm going to give some information about our racially identified schools, or RIS. Goals for the racially identifiable schools, that's Discovery and Talahi currently, are under the same 3 goals as outlined by MDE, which are achievement, integration, and access. Goal number 1, achievement disparity. For Discovery, the goal is the percentage of 4th grade Black and Hispanic students at Discovery demonstrating growth on the reading MCA as measured by the North Star Accountability System will increase from 53.2% to 60% by 2023. The percentage of 4th grade Black and Hispanic students at Discovery demonstrating growth on the math MCA as measured by the North Star Accountability System will increase from 42.6% to 60% by 2023. And then achievement disparity goal number 1 for Talahi, reading and math achievement for American Indian and Hispanic students to increase the percentage of American Indian, that's AI, and Hispanic students meeting the local math winter benchmark assessment from 6% to 40% by January 2023. Increase the percentage of American Indian and Hispanic students meeting the local reading winter benchmark assessments target from 29% to 60% by January 2023. Goal number 2, integration. Discovery, the percentage of Hispanic and American Indian parents and guardians who participate in school conferences and other school-sponsored events will increase from 72% to 100% by 2023. And an update to that for this year, for our Empower Learning conferences fall Title I meeting, Hispanic family attendance was 73%, American Indian family attendance was 67%. Talahi and integration goal is the percentage of American Indian students in Young Scholars will increase from 0% to 5% by 2023. The Young Scholars program was not in session or running as a program this year due to COVID. Oh, I didn't turn it, I'm sorry. I'm used to Ryan being here. Ryan! Okay. Goal number 3, increase access to effective and diverse teachers, or teacher equity. Discovery, to create and retain racially diverse teacher workforce at Discovery so that students and their communities are reflected in their classroom. We will increase from 7% to 16% by 2023. At Talahi, to create and retain a racially diverse teacher workforce so that students and their communities are reflected in their classroom, we will increase from 0% teachers of color to 8% by 2023. Achievement and integration funding. The Achievement and Integration Plan is funded through integration revenue at 70% state aid and 30% from the local levy. The budget amount will not change when Lincoln is added to the ANI plan. But again, remember, we had already put in some of the goals and strategies for Lincoln when we wrote the plan initially. The ANI budget is 80% is allocated to direct student services and 20% is allocated for professional development and administration. To note, 33% of the overall ANI budget is used for our racially identifiable schools. All budget items must be tied to the district ANI plan, goals, and strategies. Here are some of the things funded by the ANI budget. Equity Director, Supervisor and Secretary, Parents in Action, Family Engagement, Student Leadership Mentoring Programs, Tutoring Programs, AVID, Professional Development, BCSS EEOC positions. We currently have 22 FTEs. Young Scholars Program, currently at 4 FTEs. Affinity groups for teachers of color, and tech integrationists at the RIS schools. And that is the conclusion of my report. Any questions?
Les?
Just so I'm clear, the only school that,
Oh, wait, Les, can I hold on 1 second? I was told that the streaming is having a hard time picking up board voices, so can you get real close to the mic?
all right,
It's probably our mass.
rock star then.
All right.
Sartell is the only school currently identified as our, there were 2 schools, or it's 2 districts. Sartell and the other one is,
Well, I only talked about Sartell, but Sartell isn't the only one that is,
okay,
that has a disparity.
Right.
We just use that one as an example to give the percentages
Okay.
for the board.
but there are, we have 9 districts that are contiguous to us. Do you know offhand how many of those districts would be considered at the 20% level?
I do not have that information. I don't know if Dr. Huff is on. If she has that, that's something, is she on?
You know what? It may not be necessary. I'm going to ask a lot of questions, and I don't need the answer right now.
Okay,
Okay? I don't. I just want to sort of,
Okay.
because this just came to my head.
okay.
In each of the points you made about the goals that MDE has and the differences that they show, I would like to know if, for example, using Sartell, what are the test scores of the students of color at Sartell as compared to ours? And what is the graduation rate of the students in those other districts compared to ours? I'm trying to figure out if, I'm just trying to get, from an information standpoint, wrap my brain around all of these protected class students who are in 9 districts around us, who make up this large group of students. Are there some doing better than others in some schools, and if not, just if they are? So it's a big question. You and I can talk about it at some point. So
Okay, perfect.
because I'm not always clear on the question I'm asking
That's all
myself at
right.
this
Work
moment.
it out.
But I'm kind of interested in that. You also touched on the budget amounts about how much of this money, the integration dollars, are actually going to programs that are really designated, or specific programs that have to do with students of color.
Mhm.
And you said that 80% of the dollars are going into what would be termed direct services or access, or people that surround and help students of color do the thing. Okay. But we'll talk about the other things that just came to my head, and I'd like to sit down with you sometime and just talk about the comparison to the, Sartell's 20%,
Got it.
Holding Force and whatever. Good. Thank you. Done.
Thank you.
Al?
There we go. I have a couple of questions. Number one, So I'd also like to see, like, if we do look at students of color, say test scores of students of color in Sartell or in Sauk Rapids or in Ricori or Becker or any of the contiguous districts. I would also like to see the free and reduced lunch percentages of students of color in those districts, because I really do believe that economics has a lot to do with disparities, or at least as I'm not a big believer that skin color is the thing that makes you not, that brings your test scores down. I believe it's other factors that bring test scores down, and poverty is one of the biggest factors, along with something that we are not allowed to track, that I've always asked for us to be able to track, and that's single parenting. There's a lot of things that I believe fall into place within a community. And we may see higher test scores for students of color in Sartell, but we also might see much higher income levels for students of color in Sartell. So I think there's a lot of things that we could look at on that. So, but there were a couple of things that stuck out to me. One was, and I don't know where this falls, but last meeting, I believe we did the American Indian goals, and a lot of those were set at 100%. They wanted to see 100% of American Indian students graduating from high school, 100% meeting standards. And I noticed on the one where we had, or on the ones where we had American Indian goals here, they didn't marry up to what the American Indian Parent Group was giving back to us for what their expectation is. And I'm wondering if there's any thought into that. And are these goals that you were up on the board, those are given to us by MDE, or we're giving them to MDE?
Al, or did you have a hand up?
It's a point of clarification whenever you're.
Okay.
Yeah. But no, the goals that were up there, are those are given to us from MDE?
Yes, they give us
Okay.
3 like umbrellas, and we have to have a goal underneath the umbrellas that they give us. And they change, they change from what was the last 3 years. I know at least one of them have changed for this year, but they are very prescriptive in look at and identify as a goal.
Okay. So then on the one, if you can go back in the slides to the very first goal, I think it was the very first slide with the goal where we were, keep going. Keep going.
Okay,
No,
so then-
it was, nope, it was, now I'm lost in here. It said that it was talking about students who demonstrate growth
Oh, yeah.
on the MCA tests.
Yep.
When we say students who demonstrate growth, are we saying that if last year they get a 50 and this year they get a 51, that's demonstrating growth? Or are we talking about STAR testing where they're demonstrating a level of growth that meets or exceeds the expected growth for that period? I was lost on that. What we're asking for on that slide?
Ellen, Dr. Huff is ready to respond to that.
Perfect. Okay, good enough. I had notes. I was going to make a good effort try, but let's go to the expert.
So if you are asking about Discovery's goal, is that the growth goal that we're talking about in terms of the North Star accountability system? So that is based on how MDE defines growth. And so the 4 achievement levels: does not meet, partially meets, meets, and exceeds. Whichever level a student scores in. So let's say 3rd grade, if a student scores at the meets level, and 4th grade, they continue to score at the meets level, then that student would be indicated as growing, because even though their achievement level was the same from 3rd grade to 4th grade, because the standards are based on grade level, a level of growth had to take place for them to continue to meet. Similarly, even if a student was at partially meets in 3rd grade and continued to be partially meets in 4th grade, that student would also still be counted as growing, even though they wouldn't be marked as proficient, because once again, they had to attain some level of knowledge, a certain degree in terms of their grade level standards, in order to maintain that level, that achievement level. Students are determined they fall into the category as not making growth within the North Star system if they remain does not meet or if they drop down an achievement level. So even if a student was at exceeds in 3rd grade and 4th grade, they drop down to meets, even though that student is still proficient, then that student would be categorized as not growing for 4th grade because they dropped down an achievement level. So essentially, it's any student who maintains their achievement level or moves up, with the exception of students who are maintaining an achievement level that does not meet.
Okay, and I guess I'll say you made that very clear there. But isn't that what we measure with the STAR test?
So when we're looking at STAR growth, the STAR assessment looks at the scores compare academic peers. So not only are students compared to their same grade level peers, but also peers of similar achievement levels. So if you have 2 students whose achievement scores are on the lower range or the lower end, they will be compared as long as they're in the same grade level. And so 2 lower performing students would be compared to see if one student, if they're growing at an average rate, above average, or below, compared to what would be a typical growth trajectory for a student with those scores. Similarly, on the high range, the test works such that it's been normed that if there's a certain growth trajectory expected for students who are on the higher achieving level as well, and that differs for students on other ends of that range. And so for our higher achieving students, the academic peers would be students with similar higher scores, same grade level, and then determining whether or not those students are growing at an average, above average, or below average rate. So it works a little differently. But they are both still capturing growth, and STAR has been linked to the MCAs, and Renaissance Learning, the company that developed STAR, has done a linking study so that we can predict performance on the MCAs using STAR, but the growth measures are tracked a bit differently.
Thank you.
Les, were you going to jump back in there?
Yes, if I might. Yes, I'd like to, just for a second. One of the differences, at least as I was viewing it and as I had talked with Lacey and other staff about the American Indian thing, is that the American Indian is a parent advisory group, and the MDE is a government entity. The parent advisory group, when it said to us, in order to be in compliance, each of our students needs to reach these levels. Well, that's a parent talking to us.
Mhm.
And I think any parent in this room that's got a child in school is saying the same thing that those American Indian parents were saying. So that's a bit different than I'm trying to separate that out a little bit in terms of for our staff to look at all students then and say, we're going to do this with all students. It's different. If you're talking about each student, that's one thing. The other thing is that when Al, and I've heard Al talk about this before, about single parent and poverty things, I want people to understand, when you hear Al say that, I think what Al's looking for are places that we can provide help for people. You're not trying to identify bad people. As I've heard, I've been around him for a long time, and I know he's looking for ways to how we can be of help to people, and that's why the information is being asked for. Al,
Yeah, and I was a single parent for many years, and I know the struggles because
I just want people to
I
understand.
used to go to work and come home from work and have to cook supper and feed the kids and do homework and get them ready for bed, and it's all on one person, and it's very difficult to do when you have multiple kids.
I just want to make sure that when that thing comes out on the stream, it doesn't sound as if,
Yeah, no, it's because I believe that it is very difficult for one parent to, it's not impossible, but it's very difficult for one parent to accomplish that day after day after day after day after day after day after day. It just goes on and it,
You have 936 weeks.
right, I mean,
From
it's
birth to
a very
18.
difficult task, and
Right.
it's a lot easier if you can separate that by two, and especially if you have multiple kids, you can divide and conquer and take, one person can be working with the fourth grader and another person can be working with the sixth grader to help with homework. And it's not all on one person. So I believe that if we were allowed to track that, we may be able to identify some ways to support single parents and the kids that they're raising by giving additional resources and additional support to some of those families. But it's not something that we are allowed to track. But I truly believe that it has an impact.
That's just the clarification I wanted to make.
Okay, anyone else? Monica?
Thank you. Thank you very much for the presentation. I really like that presentation. I had a question again, because I got lost of my question with the last comment.
I can put it up here. Which slide are you looking for?
No worries. I just have to just look at what I was looking at. That was prompting my question. Should have write it down. So one of the things, the question that I have is about evaluation. I'm really concerned about how we evaluate, how do we measure progress, and what are the baselines that we have. So when I see the list, like the one that you have in your last slide about the A&I budget, for one, I forgot what A&I means.
Achievement and integration.
Oh, okay, sorry.
I'm here to help you.
All right, shouldn't have said that. So for about that budget piece, and I see a list of activities here. I want to know how do I measure these activities, and how do I figure, or how do you figure out resources that should be going to those activities? I am particularly interested in how do you see that professional development that you are providing is effective compared to other professional development that is given in the district or available? I am interested in parent engagement or family engagement, because I have tend to see the same number or the same people in different places. So how do you see that is working, and that and also family engagement looks different depending on the parent. I mean, there are parents that may never come up and show up at the school and might be completely engaged with the education of their children. So I am interested in those type of details and a way to see that through an evaluation process. So I'd like to ask you about how do you evaluate, or how can we have this, have a site of the evaluation?
So what's included in each one of the goals are strategies that we use, and that's kind of what these are, strategies that we use. And then for each one of the strategies, there's KIPS, and that is basically how we measure our progress. So there's a goal for the first year, the second year, and the third year. And so to your point, are we evaluating the programs where it gives us the feedback to determine if it's being effective? Sometimes, sometimes not. And each school is looking at what works for their school. So for example, Lincoln has a welcome meeting. So every new parent that comes, student that comes, they basically meet with the family, give them a packet, they talk to them. So the students that dropped off and said, hey, welcome to our elementary school, they're actually onboarded, if you will, to kind of help with both with the parent engagement and allowing the students to feel comfortable at the school. So if your question is, are our strategies, are they measured? Yes, they are. Are they measured in a way that makes, that gives us a thorough evaluation of the effectiveness? to our best of ability, yes, we're looking at that. And if the numbers don't match up, then that's when we look at reevaluating or looking at different strategies to accomplish the goal.
Monica, I would echo what Ellen just stated in terms of the KIPs, so the key indicators of progress. Those are really what we use to track the success of the strategies themselves. Some of the strategies that are listed, like the use of the EOCs with our communities of color, in the plan itself, the first year, the data was baseline. And so we were tracking like what type of outreach they do and what the frequency of it to determine how we could then increase it or if we needed to be creative in ways to further engage families. And so then based off of that, we are able to establish goals. So like one thing with this particular plan too is that we're able to modify and update. And so Ellen and I actually just had a meeting with our liaison from that division yesterday, I think it was, or the day before, discussing when we are at a stage of having now some of the baseline data, how do we make the amendment to submit with that included? Also, you mentioned like other ways of family engagement. And so we wanted to be really intentional too about the activities that are selected so that we can track participation and gather family feedback. And so that's why like the goal setting conferences and the specific STEM nights or STEAM nights at those sites have been intentionally called out. So that way we have a better sense of which events we are particularly targeting. And I mean, I hear you saying though that families can be engaged and maybe it's not particularly that event or that particular outreach that they prefer. But we did want to keep it consistent, so we made sure to identify specific events that are taking place.
Thank you. I do want to make a comment about, in response to what Al is saying about single parents, and I know where you're going to, but I think the part of the difficulty about looking at single parents is to look at family structure in general, because if we look at single parents, I think that won't be a accurate picture of support that children might be getting. There are many multi-generational families where grandparents or aunts, uncles take place of another person that helps in the family, and I think that that's part of the difficulty about how to classify the support that a child is getting in a household. And then same way there are couple parents that don't have any other support of people in they're two working parents and they don't have other support, might not have family here, might not have family ties or trusted people that they can draw support from them, and they're both working, and children are in many cases as alone as single parent children in those two-parent homes. So I really think that I understand what you mean by that, but it's also is more complex than just looking at single parents, is what I wanted to make a comment about.
Yeah, and then Natalie will be next.
No, I agree with you 100% on that. And, you know, there are, but if you identify someone as a single parent and talk to them and they say, I really don't need any additional support because my mom and dad are with me and helping and and I have all of those benefits, that's good. If you have a single parent who doesn't have family around, and they are doing it all themselves, I think that's different than a two-parent family where you have a mother and a father there, even if it's a working family, because generally speaking, if you have two parents working, you have two incomes in the family, you have a much better chance than a single parent at having the income necessary to get supports. And I don't know, Monica, but you're right. You are right 100%. It is more of a family structure discussion. And there are two-parent families that have lots of other problems going, you know, drugs in the household or something that's causing problems, and kids are coming with trauma living through trauma in two-parent families and single-parent families and homeless families. And I mean, there are a lot of different things to look at. But just in general, I think that I kind of start at that it is much more difficult to parent as a single parent in a situation where you don't have multi-generational living in a home. I think that's an exception to that rule, but it does make it more difficult in my mind. So but you're right on that.
Natalie, did you have your hand up then?
Yes, I have more than one question this time.
Okay.
So teacher equity, I love that we're talking about that and measuring that. It says Talahi, you want to move from 0 to 8% and Discovery from 7 to 16%. Do you know, and maybe this is for Dr. Huff, what percentage of students of color are at each of those schools?
That would be a Dr.
We'll look in the direction of the
I can
computer.
pull it up for you really
Thank you.
quickly because I don't
put that in
want
my
to
cheat sheet.
misspeak. Here, give me 1 second. So currently at Talahi, yep, we're at Talahi. We are at 92 per, wait, nope, that's not true. 80% students of color, 20.2% of our students at Talahi are white students, so roughly 80% students of color. And at Discovery, about the same. And so at Discovery, we are right around, make sure I'm doing my math right, 83% students of color.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Huff. You know, I know that as a board, we've been really proud of the efforts on recruiting and retaining teachers of color in our district, for sure. We know that we are at a similar percentage as the Minneapolis, St. Paul area, which, you know, that's amazing because we, you know, just don't have the same percentages of folks of color in this community to pick the pool from. But I guess I just wanted to highlight that as, you know, if we measure against ourselves, we want to have our kids of color, of course, see themselves in front of the classroom. So we're so far from what we need to be. And I know that everyone in this room knows that. But the 0% for Talahi was really concerning to me because I know that's one of our highest kids of color schools. So I'm glad to see that this is a specific goal and that I think 0 to 8% and 7 to 16% is really reasonable. It's going to be extremely tough, as we've talked about in this room before, but it's a reasonable goal and a really important goal. I want to talk about the RIS goal number 1 with Talahi as it refers to American Indian and Hispanic students. I'm concerned about the achievability of these goals, and I'm wondering maybe from Dr. Huff how we got to these percentages. It says for Talahi, in math, we're going to basically raise from 6 to 40% by January of 2023, and then in reading from 29 to 60% by January of 2023. I don't know that, unless I'm not remembering correctly, I don't know that I'm seeing those big jumps when Talahi comes and presents to us. I don't see those big jumps in achievement. And so I'm wondering how we got to the 40% and to the 60%.
So you are absolutely right that the goals are extremely ambitious. And when we were having our meetings last year with the principals and as a team to figure out what the goals would be and then what the supporting strategies would be, we went back and forth about setting goals where the increments would be smaller for that 3-year period. So, you know, going from 6% to 15%. And it just didn't sit right with us, and also because we were using STAR as the measure, and knowing that with STAR, we are able to progress monitor more frequently and have tools and resources that are tied directly, not tied, that are associated with that tool. So when we see specific areas that students are struggling in, there are resources that STAR provides that teachers can use to help target those specific skills. We figured that we would use STAR as the assessment instead of like Talahi no longer has MCA, so that's another thing, but we wanted that to be our assessment tool. And we decided ultimately to set pretty rigorous goals. The strategies that are associated with these goals or underneath the goals have KIPs that do have smaller, like more incremental gains towards this progress. And so we kind of chunked it that way to see if we're on track and tracking it. But I can't, Natalie, they are very ambitious. That's true. There's nothing else that I can really say about that.
Yeah. Actually, I mean, that makes sense that it's STAR that we're using. And I guess I wasn't thinking clearly about how Talahi is now just through second grade, right? Right? Okay. And I think we've seen STAR have much more growth than maybe MCAs or other sorts of measures that we have. So, I mean, I'm all for an ambitious goal. I just get concerned that a high goal is just a number, and I know we went away from that, right? Because what do we all want? We want 100%, but we're going away from that so that we have achievable goals. Thanks for that. I want to comment on something that Al said, and it concerns me. And I know that we've talked about this before, and that's, tell me if I heard you wrong, but I think I heard you say that skin color doesn't matter for student achievement. Did I hear you right on that, or is that not what you said?
I said that I don't believe that skin color is the determining factor in student achievement. I believe that Black people can learn at the same rate as white people can learn. There is no inferiority or inability to learn because you are Black. It's factors. The fact that you're Black may have caused some environmental factors in your growth as you were growing up, and a lot of times it has a lot to do with your ability. How can I put this? If you're a young kid growing up and one parent is a doctor, one parent's a lawyer, you're traveling the world the entire time you're growing up, you have access to just about anything that you ever need when you need it, you will achieve fairly high in your lifetime. I don't care if you're Black or if you're white, it doesn't matter. I see many, many very successful Black families and Black children. They generally aren't subjected to the severe economic and hardship conditions that others, but I do not believe in any way, shape, or form that the color of a person's skin has any effect on their ability to learn. That's what I said.
Yeah, and I agree with that for sure, that because of your skin color, you can or cannot learn is definitely not a thing. I think that maybe I was just looking for more clarification, because we see in the Mdhr report that there's evidence that kids of color have a different experience in our schools than white kids do. And so is it because they don't have as much of an ability to learn? Of course not. But I mean, the reality of life and what I've noticed with my kids who are white and their kids of color classmates is that they just have a different life in America. White people have a different life in America than people of color do. And of course, all the intersectionality you're talking about exists as well. Of course, that is definitely something. But I think we as a district have really been honest about the fact that we have to bring more supports for kids of color because people of color in our communities have disparate outcomes. We've seen that with COVID-19 and the disparate outcomes for people of color. I mean, this is just the reality of our area and of our nation. So I was just wanting that clarification, and thank you for that, Al. And that's all.
Les, were you trying to raise your hand or?
Tap your mic.
No.
Okay, you're good. Then go ahead, Monica.
So I just wanted to make a point here when Natalie, when you were talking about the racially identifiable schools and teacher equity, I just wanted to ask, since Tracy's here, just wanted to have her remind us about the demographic report and how the teachers of color in our schools are reflected to the population, not the population of students currently right now, but the population of teachers available. Because I do think that is an important point that we really need to highlight and we need to be proud of it.
Is it on now? Okay. And I think Natalie, while we were visiting, was trying to make that point as well, that the outstate numbers for teachers of color is about 1.2%. The state as a whole sits between 4% and 5%. And so for us to be sitting in our district at 6.63% right now is far outpacing what outstate districts generally are able to do. So that's really good news. And just a point of clarification on the Talahi numbers in terms of right now, I think the 0 number may have been at the start of the plan.
Yes.
But currently that number is 3.7%, I think, and the discovery number is a little higher than the start of that as well. So we're continuing to monitoring those, but I think that was the start of the plan, so.
Okay, then Les, are you jumping back in with equity?
Yes, I want to be careful that we not get too sidetracked by numbers that seem too energetic. Joe Clark in New Jersey, Jaime Escalante in California, and a number of other teachers and principals around this nation have done some dramatic and unbelievable kinds of things in the schools that they entered. And our problem is, I think, that we're not willing to ask those people what they did. We're not willing to read their books because they're people of color, I think. And that their theories and mannerisms of how they improved those schools were dramatic. I mean, Escalante, in 8 years, the movie portrays it happening in 1 year, but it took him 8 years, but he did something rather dramatic. Even his fellow teachers didn't like him because of that, but as did Joe Clark out in New Jersey. So I think what's important is that we might want to begin to look at research and behaviors that have been implemented or projects implemented by scholars of color around the country. When we're trying to figure out how to describe the experience of people of color, white people really shouldn't do that. Black people ought to do that. People of color ought to describe themselves as opposed to white people trying to describe us. I'm a person of color. I was raised by colored people, okay? In Minneapolis, in a colored neighborhood. I got a doctorate, okay? So I think there's a bit of a problem when we begin to continue to act as if we can talk about my experience being so substantially different from the experience of white people, because it's not. There's one part of it that is, and it has to do with discrimination. But, you know, we need to have a different kind of conversation, more expansive conversation, less heated conversation. I know I'm the one that's getting heated. but I would like to, I think we should have that kind of conversation, because I think Al's right. I mean, we have to, everybody's right, as a matter of fact. But it's a matter of sitting down and saying, let's have this conversation in District 742 in a different way than people around the country and people around the state have the conversation. Because if we continue to talk about these things in the same old way, we're going to have the same old outcomes. And I think we're different here. This district is different. You have to have gone around the state and around the country to see the difference here. And we may not have this opportunity for the rest of the district's life, and we don't want to squander it. So we have to be careful how we approach this issue because it's different right now, and we don't want to lose the texture of this difference that we have that's available to us. So that's all but thank you for letting me spout.
Thank you. Just a second, Monica. I just want to say to all the board members here, thank you for being very respectful to each other's opinions, allowing everybody to talk, and to presume good intentions that we are all here. We all believe in all of our students and support the mission. And so sometimes words can be misunderstood, and we're being respectful to not jump to a misunderstanding, but to listen. So go ahead, Monica.
So this is getting good. So this is a work session, so we're supposed to talk to each other. So I'm all for that conversation, Les. So my question to you is that how do you suggest that we have that conversation? Are we having that conversation right now, just so I just get ready? Or are we, or are you proposing to have the conversation in what sense? Or like, how do we get to that conversation?
Let me just suggest that we not fall backwards into that conversation. That conversation needs to be planned, thought out, and with some structure around it. I spouted. Emotional spouting is not going to solve this problem, believe me. And I understand that that's what I was doing. We have to be very thoughtful, very careful, and I think the chair is very right. We got to be real careful about assumptions we make about people in the room and about their conversation and the words they use, because the words aren't what are going to hurt us. It's the emotion of not understanding each other. And we are a very powerful group of people, including the 18 cabinet members and all those people who have the ability to make such a difference in this world for these kids. But we do need to know what difference to make. And so I just think we have too much power, too much authority, too much opportunity to squander it as other people have let it squander. So I appreciate the fact that there's differences of opinion here that help all of us keep our feet to the fire and all that good stuff. So, but I don't want to fall into it backwards. Let's plan it and make sure that we're moving ahead with this. And that's part of what the conversation I want to have with Natalie about a retreat, that we got to think about how to plan that and make some sense of it.
Okay, so I'm hoping we can move on.
Well,
We're- Can we let Ellen? Okay, great. So moving on to annual staffing timelines presented tonight by Tracy Flynn Bowe, Executive Director of Human Resources.
Yep, I'm trying to get out of there. There we go. Thank you. Okay, there we go.
Okay. So good evening, Chair Hawes, board members, and assistant superintendents. This is the kickoff of our staffing conversation with the school board. And on the board, you'll see the staffing timelines and kind of a flow chart of that process. We began this process in January on the executive team and beginning our work with principals and directors across the district. But you'll see on the left side of that graphic all of the actions that are going to be significant from the board perspective. And so the first one is tonight to just simply remind you that the staffing process is underway. The next meeting that will have staffing implications is on April 7th. And at that time, Amy and I will be bringing forward to you all the, some of the projections that we'll get through the process of enrollments and registration projections that are happening right now. And we'll be able to give you kind of a big picture view of any significant shifts in enrollments or registrations that might impact staffing for the coming year. On April 21st is kind of the big date for the school board in terms of action, and that is the date that you will make a decision on non-renewal of probationary teachers. I'll remind board members and some new board members that that process is done very intentionally, that each year we have 300 and some new teachers, probationary teachers in our teacher ranks, and each year we have non-renewals of somewhere between 20 and 30 teachers. And most often that's due to those shifts in enrollments and registrations and those kinds of things, and budget changes across the district. Often it's because of just those natural shifts that happen in the life course of the staff. And so we have people that this year we probably have 20 or 30 teachers that are on leaves of absences or childcare leaves or those kinds of things that may be tenured, and next year they come back. And so resignations and retirements and leaves of absences and all of those things create some fluidity every year from year to year in our staffing. And so at the time that we have to make more conservative projections for staffing of next year in the spring, we always make those in a more conservative way, knowing that we won't get those decisions back, and we have to make this decision by statute by July 1st. And so in order to meet all of those timelines, we do it in April. And so I would anticipate, as it's been for the last dozen years or so that I've been here, that 20 to 30 teachers will be in that motion for non-renewal. I met with all of our new teachers about 3 weeks ago with Chris Erickson from the SCEA, and we always talk through that process with them so they know how those decisions are made and how they'll be notified, and then what happens in the wake of those decisions. Very often we are pleased to be able to hire teachers back as our staffing projections firm up in May and June. But that is the big decision-making point, I think, on this chart. I think the most anxiety for our staff is always around those decisions for our new teachers. This year there is some dynamic, impact on all of our teachers because the DLA has drawn teachers out of all of our buildings over to support the DLA. And so we've had lots of those teachers saying, I get to go back to where I was, right? And for the most part, that's true. But, it also depends on where the kids go back to which school. And so this time of year, there's always some anxiety around staffing. There's always the worry about where will I be. I can assure the board, as I assure every year our teachers, that our goal is to create the best matches of teachers to meet the needs of our students and our schools, and to maintain as much consistency for kids and for staff as we can in that process. But nonetheless, when we start this process, everybody gets a little nervous in the spring. So most of that is about the probationary teachers. We also have reserved a date in May if we have any final non-renewal decisions that we have to make as that staffing firms up. But that's kind of an outline of the staffing process. You'll see all of the work in the middle of that chart is about what's happening with the cabinet and the building leaders and directors and principals kind of working together hand in hand to make sure we make the best decisions we can throughout that process. Any questions on the staffing process?
Wow, no questions. Scott, do you have a question?
I just thought it was quite impressive when I first saw that. You go through a lot of stuff.
We are busy at this time.
Okay, thank you. Next up, we have proposed revised board policy 419, tobacco-free environment, possession and use of tobacco, tobacco-related devices, and electronic delivery devices, vaping awareness and prevention instruction.
The title of that policy is a mouthful, and that's one of the new changes. And so this is policy 419, and dates to this policy, the first one being the title, and they've significantly expanded that title. This used to be kind of our smoke-free campus policy, And with all of the new products that are out there that both students and adults are using, this policy has expanded the last couple of times that we've reviewed it for changes. So again, the title is the first change you'll see. The next change you'll see is in Article 3, which is definitions. And they've gotten rid of the words tobacco and tobacco related because they're just defining this, the scope of this world has changed. We're not talking about tobacco products anymore. We're talking about all of the ways that these products have developed in terms of vaping and aerosol products. And so you'll see a much more expanded definition of electronic delivery device.
Tracy?
Yeah.
When you say they, are we saying they, the Minnesota School Boards Association, writing this policy, or are we saying they, the Minnesota legislature, defining things in statute?
Thanks, Al. This is, these updates are coming from the Minnesota School Boards Association. They've also added a definition of heated tobacco products, so that's new in the definition section. In paragraph C, where they talk about tobacco products and defining those, they've included an exclusion for products that might be authorized by the Food and Drug Administration, to be clear that we're not talking about products that are approved for medical use and other uses. In Article 4, there are paragraphs regarding exceptions to this policy for the use of tobacco on school district property for a traditional Indian spiritual or cultural ceremony. And you'll see the new section of that is at the end of paragraph B, where it says nothing in this exception authorizes smoking or use of tobacco, tobacco-related products, or electronic delivery devices on school property or at off-campus events sponsored by the school district. And we had a discussion about this in Personnel Committee. Specifically, the question was asked about, would a spiritual ceremony include lighting tobacco on school property or on school campus? And Lacey was really helpful in giving us background about that, and she said that would be extremely rare. Most often the raw tobacco is there as a ceremonial offering. It might be in tobacco ties that might be offered to the spiritual leader of the event or to the dancers or performers at the event, but it would be extremely rare to think about it being lit on school grounds. So, thank you, Board Development Committee. You're on both, so I forget which committee I'm in. The next section is Section 5, which is adding the requirements for doing anti-vaping instruction for our middle schoolers and high school students. And if people have questions about that, Dr. Putnam would be happy to answer those. And then there's just the legal reference change in the statute. Any questions about that one?
Looks like we're good. And are you up again
I
here?
am up for one more.
Question, was there any changes in statute surrounding that, or was this just Minnesota School Boards Association changing the policy?
I think in the references where it talks about Minnesota Statute 120B.238, the change in the statute was the requirement for anti-vaping instruction for middle schoolers.
Okay.
Okay, next up, we have proposed revised board policy 424, license status, first reading.
Yes, and this policy just is the policy that requires all of our educators to have valid teaching licenses and talks about our procedures for making sure that is so. And the only change in this policy is the change of the name of the licensing board from the Minnesota Department of Education to the Professional Educator Licensing and Standards Board, which is PELSB.
Any questions or comments? Okay, thank you, Tracy.
All right, thank you.
So next up, we have proposed revised board policy 427, first reading, presented by Carol Potter, Executive Director of Student Services and Special Education. And this is workload limits for certain special education teachers.
evening, Chair Haas, board members, assistant superintendents. So I have 4 policies for you tonight. Can you hear me okay? The first policy, 427, is workload limits for certain special education teachers. And this is set up for teachers who work with students that provide services to special education students 60% or less of the instructional day. And what this policy does is just define for us what goes in a workload analysis. So each year when we do the staffing, just like Tracy was talking about, we run a workload analysis based on the support that teachers supply to students. So there's direct services, indirect services, and which gives us their workload. And within a workload, there's things like travel time, parent contact time, and time to write IEPs. All of those pieces are added into a workload analysis to determine how many staff we need. And the only thing that has changed in this policy for us and for MSBA is the wording, again, to, instead of the Minnesota Board of Education, the Professional Educator Licensing and Standards Board. And that, again, is the board that licenses all teachers and is just referencing the special education teachers in this one. And that is the only change throughout this entire policy. Any questions on that one? Okay.
Next up, we have a proposed revised board policy 516, student medication, first reading.
Oh, sure, thanks. Okay, students. You just on that. So obviously we provide, in our health services, we provide students their medication every day under prescription by a physician. And in this policy, there was just a few changes. And the first change, bottom of page 2, and that is, it just talks about that we are going to attempt to call a parent or guardian. If a student is bringing a controlled substance to school, we always have to have a form from the parent or guardian saying that it's okay for us to provide it to that student. And we have to have a physician's order as well to provide it to the student. And so it is stating that we have to make sure that we do that. And if we're transporting or we have to transport a medication. So if it is not a controlled substance, our nurses can do that. If it is a controlled substance, we have to have law enforcement do that. So the policy, the new areas that you're going to see in this policy outline those different pieces. And let me just get into my notes here. So I'm going to go to the next section. So something new also is that a student can now possess their own sunscreen. And you think that's pretty simple, but it always had to go into the health office before if a student brought sunscreen. So now students can carry their own sunscreen. We don't need a physician's order to use sunscreen, and students can put it on themselves. The school personnel are not required to put it on. So that was something exciting to see. We get a lot of questions about sunscreen. Section 1, 2, and 3 are all about our procedure for regarding unclaimed drugs or medications. And so number 1 tells us that we have to contact and make a really good effort to call the parent to make sure that they come and pick up their medication. And so we did this a lot this year as we were changing learning models. And students were home, and then they were back in school, and some were in hybrid, some were in distance learning. And so we really had to make a very concerted effort to make sure that we were contacting parents and that students had their medications going back and forth in an appropriate way. And then the second one, I mentioned this a little bit earlier. So this one is about if it is not a controlled substance. So under this statute, a nurse can transport for destruction. So if at the end of the year, a parent does not pick up a medication and it is not a controlled substance, a nurse can take it to a disposal site to get rid of it. Now, the next paragraph talks about if it's a controlled substance, so something like a pain medication, Oxycontin, Adderall, Ritalin, any of those medications that may be taken at school, we collect those, and first of all, we call the parent and say, do you still want to come and get this medication? We give them the opportunity to do that. If they do not do that, the transportation of the medication has to be done by law enforcement. It can't be done by one of our nurses. Our nurses will collect it at school to say which ones those are, and then law enforcement, we partner with law enforcement to bring it to the place where we dispose of them. I bet you didn't know that. Yeah. And then the references are changed on the last page as well. Any questions on student medications at all? Okay.
And this is just out of curiosity question. If a student brings a medication to school and say that there's a timeline or time frame when they're supposed to take it, say they're supposed to take it every 4 hours or something like that, is there any requirement or method of reporting missed doses? So if a student does not take it, then the nurse is required to report, is that?
Yeah, that's
Okay.
a really great question now. So if someone is required to take something, let's say every couple of hours at school or every 4 hours, that student has it set up, usually with their homeroom teacher, that they are sent down to the health office to do that. If they do not come down, the health office makes a call or makes a trip to the classroom to say, we got to get this done. And if they were to miss it for some reason, so if the student is absent, we're always checking to make sure if they were in attendance or not in attendance. If they were in attendance and they missed it, that would be kind of unusual because we would be going to get them if they missed it. But we record everything that goes out and everything that comes in. So if a parent brings in a new bottle, for example, everything is recorded right off of that label. And then each time that medication is handed out, it is reported how much and what time of day that happens. And so it would be rare that something would be missed, but it may happen. It may happen if a student is perhaps marked absent, but then returns to school and then they weren't gotten because they weren't marked back in. I suppose there could be something like that would happen, but it would be rare that would happen, that they would miss it. Mm-hmm.
Okay, thank you. Next up, proposed revised Board Policy 523, policies incorporated by reference, first reading.
Okay, so this is kind of a unique policy, and unique and simple at the same time. And what it is it is simply just a policy that indicates that when any policy refers to both students and staff, that it's listed in this policy. So what has happened for this one is that a couple of policies have been taken out because they only referred to students And I apologize, I don't have the strike and line one up at this time, but I'll tell you what they are. They are 511 student fundraising, so that one was taken out because it only refers to students. Internet acceptable use and safety policy only referred to students, and then field trips only referred to students. And so those were taken out because this really just indicates when our policies refer to both staff and students. Any questions on that one?
All right.
It's pretty unique.
Okay, last one. Proposed revised board policy 532, use of crisis teams, school resource officers, and peace officers to remove students with IEPs from school grounds. First reading.
Okay, there was not many, very rare, just a few updates, not many at all. And it really comes at the back of the policy, but just a little, I just want to tell you what this policy is about. And it is exactly what it says, use of crisis teams, school resource officers, and peace officers. And peace officers are our CSOs, our community support officers in our school. That they're not police officers. Our SROs are the police officers that we partner with the St. Cloud Police to have in school to support us when there's an illegal event. And so the policy just really talks about how students with IEPs are subject to the same removal as students in general ed, and that we, under an emergency situation, we can remove a student whether they're on an IEP or not. And, you know, that doesn't fall under any due process issues or anything like that. And then at the very end, they talk a little bit about, I'm going to get this right here. We'll see the changes, and the changes are really in the dates. And so for those of you that aren't aware, in our district, we have one room that is a full seclusion room. And what that means is that it's at our Journey program at Roosevelt with students with significant needs. And that room is utilized when a student is dysregulated to a point where they can't be around other staff. So it would be unsafe for another staff member to be in the room with them. And so the room is called seclusion because they're by themselves until they calm down. It has been in rare use, and the room has to be licensed by the Department of Ed. And so they come, they check, once you build it, they come and they sign off for having that. And that's the only one that we have in the district. And I'm happy to say that it's not used very often, but when it is used, it's critical that it's used at that time. And so what these dates are saying is that whenever we are using that seclusion room, that we document it. Every time we have to do that. And every time that we are putting a student in a restrictive procedure, which is a hold, so if a student is dysregulated and we need to hold them or we need to transport them physically to another area to keep other students safe or keep themselves safe, we have to document those, and we need to do a debriefing. And there's long paperwork that goes with all of that each time that happens, because we really want to make sure that everyone is safe, that staff are safe and students are safe. And so we teach people crisis prevention intervention. And so we teach all special education teachers and all non-licensed staff how to do that in an effective and safe way. And so these little updates here are just saying that by the first 4 dates, by January 15th, April 15th, July 15th, and October 15th, we're going to report to the commissioner how many times that we've used seclusion with students. And then the other date, by July 15th, we're giving a summary report, and in that summary report, we talk about seclusion and we talk about the number of restrictive procedures or holds that we have used with kids. And we have a team that meets quarterly to talk about where is it happening, how is it happening, what kind of hold is being used, and how do we decrease the number of holds. And so we have a team that works on that to make sure that we are doing everything as we should. And so that is the only update in this policy per MSBA. Any questions on that policy? Okay, wonderful, thank you
I
all.
got a question.
Yeah, good question. Yes, we do. And so to get a student into a seclusion room, you know, more than likely they're probably dysregulated, as you suggested. And so we use that crisis prevention intervention to either transport, physically transport, or our first line of defense always is that verbal de-escalation. And so we're using our words, we're not putting hands on until we absolutely have to put hands on. But if it was a situation in which the student was fully out of control and in danger of themselves and others, we would use a hold type of transport that we have been taught to move them to the seclusion room. Yeah, good question.
She was taught those holds and she got beat up anyway. Kids back their head and smack her in the face and all kinds of problems. You know, Les.
Who's with the territory?
I know. The cops are out there all the time.
Yeah, I'm glad to say that our verbal techniques have really improved. I'm very happy about that, how we can do that now.
Les?
Just a comment. I think that people really do need to understand that that staff are highly trained who would wind up physically interacting with a student like that. I mean, the training is unbelievable, and because I've been through it when I worked at the children's home, and you just, I think I mean, we're very safe in that respect, and that children are treated very carefully. And I think the first point of talking to them and staying away, you kind of look like a coward because you're keep backing up but containing. So there's some. I just want people to understand that this is very carefully administered and trained for people. So.
Okay, thank you, Carol. Way to rock those. And that adjourns our work session for the night. It is 8:44 p.m. Have a good night. And Gary, that's 1 minute ahead of schedule.
Oh, it's always on. You're always, if we're always on. And we don't have to worry about that because we all have good sense.